Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Our broadcast tonight brought to you by NatureBox. NatureBox ships great tasting and wholesome snacks right to your front door, so you can snack smarter with wholesome, delicious treats like guacamole bites. Support this show, order a free NatureBox sampler box so you can try them out at naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. Log on, naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. My mind is a little scattered tonight, so I'll just throw a few things out here at the beginning of the show. I've had some people complain about that, How come it's 10 minutes into the broadcast and you're not talking about the thing that's on the title? And I'm like, I'm really sorry you don't know where the freaking fast forward option is. Because some people enjoy the opening monologue as we talk about life and the universe and everything, right? And so I kind of set things up and talk about what's happening in my life and upcoming events and upcoming shows and just whatever. And it's kind of a handshake before we get into the meat of the discussion. And some people are like, how come you're not going right into it? Well, just chill or just scoot forward a few minutes. There are a lot of folks like to chill with me as we talk about whatever. And I'm a little irritable today. You ever have those days where you just have a short fuse? And I think it's because we haven't slept for a couple of days. Not really. And any pet owner knows what this scenario is like. I'm in REM sleep, right? I'm in stage 4 sleep. I'm off in La La Land. I'm visiting whatever dreamland has come my way. I am out. And few things can get you from that state to hyper alert panic mode as the sound of a dog on your bedspread doing this. 4-pound dog. I learned to fly, right? I'm totally out. I hear that sound. I'm now absolutely awake. I grab Henry and I run him into the tile. Put him on the tile. Okay, throw up there. Throw up there. Bring him back. You not feeling very well, little fella? You doing okay? I sort of check and make sure he's doing all right. Okay, all right. Everybody's awake. We put him back on the bedspread. Fall back asleep. And then, jump out of bed. Do I make it? No. So now everything goes in the laundry. You refit the bed, new sheets, new comfort, and new everything. And then you try to get back to sleep. And he's done it twice in a row. Now, he seems fine during the day. We're keeping our eyes on him. Is he getting too hot? Was it something he ate? I don't know. I mentioned something about it on Facebook. And somebody said, we have the same trouble. We sleep with paper plates on the nightstand. so that whenever we hear that sound, we can immediately grab the plate and just stick it under the dog's mouth. And then we just go throw it away and we go right back to sleep. And I was like, that's ridiculous. Oh, what a great idea. What a great idea. He seems fine. He's sitting here at my feet and he's just looking at me. But it's very possible during the conversation tonight, while we're talking about someone's extremely heartfelt story, you're going to hear some dog start going, heh, heh. Oh. Oh my God. What a day. What else is going on? Oh, let me float this and see what you think about it. If you have followed this show at all, you know that over the past couple of years, I've alluded to the fact that I'm interested in a second podcast, or have been interested in trying a second podcast where we talk about other things. You know, I enjoy speaking about this particular topic, about rationality and speaking out against superstitious thinking and about atheism and atheism-related topics. And I love this show. It is my first love, you know. But from time to time, it's fun to talk about other things. In fact, in the past, we've done a couple of broadcasts where we actually call it something like, you know, off the subject or totally off the subject or random or something. I don't know. And we'll just chat about whatever comes up. And so I thought I'd like to maybe set up a separate podcast and we'll just do it from time to time and talk about other things. But it just hasn't happened. I mean, I was talking about this last July. And I'm no closer now to getting it done than I was back then. You know, I was eyeball deep in the book. By the way, thanks to everybody for the support so far of Sacred Cows. The book comes out in April, but people are pre-ordering at sacredcowsbook.com, and I get to autograph the pre-orders, and they've been amazing. So thank you so much for supporting that endeavor. I was eyeball deep in the book, getting it written. Of course, on the tour schedule and promoting and prepping the podcast we were doing and producing videos and speeches and blah, 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 blah. And it just hasn't happened. So this is an option for us if you think it might be palatable. What if we were to not do a separate podcast? It wasn't a different podcast with a different name posted on a different page at Blog Talk Radio. But what if we occasionally did it on this channel and we just prefaced the shows on the title by saying off the subject? So it could be the Thinking Atheist Podcast, you know, 207, 210, 250, off the subject, and then whatever. And we could talk about whatever happens to come up. Is that something that would be palatable for you? And it would be extra. It wouldn't be like I was replacing the Thinking Atheist content with this non-atheist content. I know what you come to this channel for, and I know what really the desire of my heart is as far as the fight against superstition. I want it to be about that, and so those shows will air on their normal times, but these would be just extra. Like a Thursday night, we all get together and we do an off-the-subject kind of show. I mean, what do you think of that? You think it would be a good idea? Would it be a distraction? Would people get it? Would they see the title and not understand what we were up to? I don't know, something I'm thinking about. But the other show, I just can't get it done. I'm working on the speech for Australia, getting ready to be gone for weeks in March to go do that, and prepping some video work for several conventions coming up in the tour schedule and the other podcasts coming up, and I'm just overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. In the best possible sense of the word, I'm overwhelmed. And so I'm trying to figure out how to get that done. So anyway, drop me a note or stick something in the comments section and let me know what your thoughts are on that, okay? I am way excited about next Tuesday's broadcast. There's a lot of bunk out there. A lot of bunk in this world. We're going to have on a panel of debunkers next Tuesday night. I've got Dr. Harriet Hall, who's probably best known as the Skepdoc, one of the columnists for Skeptic and Skeptical Inquirer. She's one of the founders of the Science-Based Medicine website, and she's done a lot of writing on just junk science and pseudoscience and homeopathy and whatever. James Underdown is the executive director for the Center for Inquiry Los Angeles, and he's done a ton of debunking over his career. And in fact, they're offering, it's like the Randy Prize of $1 million. Well, he is the chairman of the Independent Investigations Group in Hollywood, California. The IIG offers a $50,000 prize to anybody who can prove paranormal activity under scientific testing conditions. So far, no winners. Go figure. But he's going to join me. And then third on the panel is the Science Babe. You can go to scibabe.com. It's Yvette Guinevere is her name. She's an analytical chemist with a background in forensics and toxicology, and she does a lot of stuff, especially on the anti-vaxxers and whatnot. We're all going to just sit around and just talk about debunking the bunk, and it's going to be a very informative and very entertaining show. So get ready. That's next Tuesday night. The following week, I have on the agenda a broadcast called Religious Schools, Religious Rules. Are you the product of a Christian school or a Catholic school or some sort of a religious institution of education? And they had some strange rules and had some very weird guidelines, or maybe they weren't strict. Tell me those stories. You can email podcast@thethinkingatheist.com or call the show in a couple of weeks. And then it looks like the next show going to be about the Unitarians. And that's a subject I'm interested in. You know, the Unitarian Church, this sort of inclusive umbrella where all kinds of ideas and beliefs and backgrounds can converge. You know, the Unitarian Universalists really do interest me. And so I'm working on getting some Unitarian quote unquote ministers on the air for that. Plus your experiences and perspectives on those. You can email again, podcast@thethinkingatheist.com. And finally, I'm fascinated, obviously, by CCM, the contemporary Christian music industry, because it was my background. I was a CCM radio host for about 12 years. Well, it turns out that the founder of the Newsboys has come out as an atheist, and he's going to join me on a podcast late March or early April. And I've got some other folks who have done work inside, behind the scenes in Christian music, and they are going to join me and sort of talk about what it's really like. What are the artists really like? What is it like working for essentially the money machine, which is, you know, it's one of the most profitable, certainly one of the most popular radio formats in the United States, believe it or not. Contemporary Christian music is big business. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to get perspectives from people who have been behind the scenes. And if you're one of those people, send me an email and submit something for consideration on the show. I'd love to hear from you. Podcast@thethinkingatheist.com. So all that housekeeping kind of out of the way, okay? I want to make sure you knew what was coming up, because we've got a ton of amazing shows on the horizon. Right now, if you go to the NatureBox website, if you go there right now, you're going to see two things, okay? You're going to see pretty pictures, and you're going to see options. The pictures, of course, NatureBox's nutritionist-approved snacks. I've got the website up right here on my computer. You can just browse. And then you load up your online pantry. You got a virtual pantry there. So you just select and stick it in there. Stuff like chocolate banana chips, dried California peaches, toffee almond granola, over 100 snacks to choose from. And you can filter by preferences, which means you've got options. You can search by taste, nutrition, info, fruits or nuts, granola, baked, whatever. 0 artificial flavors, colors or sweeteners, no high fructose corn syrup, 0 grams trans fats, and you can check them out with a free trial sampler box that's got 5 of their most popular snacks. So if you want to support the show and enjoy some delicious NatureBox snacks, they are shipped right to you. Go to naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. I don't know about you, but I come from religion, and I sort of came out as an atheist on my own terms. Some people around me had suspicions when I began asking these inconvenient questions. I started saying, well, what about this? And what about that? And what about this scripture? And what about this sermon? And what about this, and this? And those are obviously going to inform many people about your mindset. Where are you in your mind and your heart? What are you doing? What are you thinking? And so they had suspicions. And then eventually I just said so. I am an atheist. I actually wrote it out in a letter to family and a few close friends, and I sent it out via email. It's very interesting because I sent it to a lot of people. I have a big family, a lot of people. One response, only one response from my mother and father, who essentially declared that I had been preaching the religion of atheism. And so that little Ferris wheel began. But I had, even though it was a hard thing, you know, extricating myself from religion and saying out loud, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we got 2 major religious universities in this city. We got churches everywhere. I can drive out to the end of my neighborhood, hang a left, and there's not just a church, but a huge church with a big LED outdoor sign and 3 crosses illuminated, and they're everywhere. I can drive a mile down that street, and there's another church, and another, and another. It's everywhere, all over Facebook. I saw somebody this week post something about the death of a young man. I guess he was killed in a car accident or something. I didn't see a lot of details about it. But in the comments section, it's prayers. We're praying for you. Prayers. He's in heaven now. He's in a better place. God is so good, that kind of stuff. And it's hard for me to see that and not just jump in and go, what the hell are you people talking about? The most powerful being in the universe couldn't prevent this tragedy from happening. And now you guys are thanking this sort of absentee landlord, if you'll allow me to quote the film Devil's Advocate, the absentee landlord, the absentee parent, the deadbeat parent. You're thanking him and pledging allegiance for what? Stripping this precious life from you? I understand it's a coping mechanism. Look, I understand what's happening, but it doesn't make it any easier to abide when you see people who are, there's another guy, got himself in a huge car accident. He just banged himself up, spinal damage, and he's having to learn to walk again, right? Surrounded by physicians and medical professionals and therapists and people who are getting him back on his feet. So there's a picture of him. He's covered in all these braces and things, and he's got a walker, right? He's learning to walk again. He has an unbelievably religious mother and father. This is one of those homeschool dudes who spent his entire childhood essentially sheltered from the world. So his father posts this photograph and says, we don't know why God allowed this to happen, but we do not doubt his goodness. And then he thanks God, thanks God, thanks God. And it's a long post, not one mention of the surgeon. Not one word of thanks to the physicians, to the nurses, to the hospital staff, not one. And I just wanted to just chime in there. This is an offensive omission of gratitude for those who were actually there for your son. Because while the paramedics were driving to the accident scene, God was sitting on his hands up there going, well, shit, that sucks. Ugh. Anyway, I totally got off of it. It just bothered. I told you I was irritable today. Just irritable. So, you comment on things like that, or you say things on Facebook about how when Obama's at the National Prayer Breakfast recently, and he actually factually states that, well, horrible things were done in the name of Christianity. And the Christian culture freaks because, oh my God, he just threw Christianity under the bus. It's terrible. He's absolutely wrong about Islam being a religion of peace. He keeps saying it, and it's just so hugely false. It just hurts my heart every time this misinformation flies out of his mouth. But he's absolutely spot on correct about horrible things being done in the name of Christianity. Yeah, anybody who's got even a cursory understanding of any history book and the Bible knows that this is true, and everybody's having a fit. You go on and you say something to someone about it and say, well, actually, he's correct. People get it. People start to suspect. And then you just say the word, I'm an atheist. I don't believe. I do not believe. And you do it on your terms. What if you are in a situation where you aren't ready to do it on your terms? You're just not there. And a few key people know the truth, but most people are kind of in the dark, and they'd be fine if they stay that way, at least for now, for a host of reasons. There was a Facebook post from a guy named Eric, and he said this. He said, if you live in an Islamic country, I can understand you hiding your atheism in modern America. Shame on you. Pretending there's something to be ashamed of plays into the religious nuts' hands. Be proud of it, and damn the consequences. And of course, I had to respond that I disagree. First of all, it's done on somebody else's terms, not your own. And because many people come to non-belief after years, even decades of entangling themselves in this religious culture. religious relationships, careers where they're bosses who have the power to hire and fire, right? The bosses may be hugely religious, and even if they can't legally fire you for religious reasons, they can fire you for something else. Maybe they're sparing somebody, and I buy this excuse. You've got an elderly grandparent weeks or months from passing away, and you think, well, what good would it do to go tell Grandma I'm an atheist, and Grandma has been a Sunday go-to-meeting Baptist for her entire life and believes she will see you in heaven? I mean, yeah, on principle, you could go in and say, Grandma, you should know this. I'm being true to myself. But the compassionate part, I would think, says, you got to choose your battles. And right now, what's the cost benefit? What do I get out of it? Besides a feeling of superiority, will I change her mind? No. Will I distress her in the final days of her life? Yes. Would the compassionate thing be just to hang on, play it cool? I think so. There are a lot of legitimate reasons people aren't out with their non-belief. What if somebody outs you? What if somebody blows the whistle? What if somebody whispers in somebody else's ear? What happens if information you were hoping to sort of parcel out slowly, or maybe all at once at a later date, all of a sudden ends up completely on the table, exposed, and it's out, and there's no getting that 800-pound gorilla back in the cage? What are you going to do? That's what this broadcast is about. Kayla sent me a message and said, after several years of wondering, exploring, and reflecting, I came to the conclusion last spring that I was an atheist. This posed something of a problem. My family is overwhelmingly Christian, and not just nominally. We're a house full of independent, fundamentalist, and American Baptists, replete with deacons and pastors wives. Growing up, we were at our particular independent, fundamentalist, evangelical congregation every time the doors were open. We cleaned the church on Saturdays. We were there twice on Sundays, Wednesday nights, events on Fridays, whenever. My initial revelations were quite limited. I reached out to an aunt, my mother's younger sister, and the black sheep of our family in many ways for her outspoken liberal and feminist views, but this was safe. I was 99% sure that she was, in fact, an atheist herself. My text was simple. I think I am an atheist, and I have no idea what to do. Her call was wonderful and supportive, and I was right. She, too, was an atheist. Other than my aunt, my husband, and one sister, though, I didn't tell anyone. I lived an openly secular life online, gladly identifying, but I did not change anything about my daily life. The only noticeable shifts were in reading material. I picked up tomes on philosophy and science and devoured them, trying to make up for the lost time of my fundamentalist upbringing. And then it happened. My aunt passed away at a mere 43 years old. She'd had cancer, and initially we were told it was very treatable. She underwent a double mastectomy, but there was an issue. The tumor was not the cancer they'd initially thought. More tests later, we found that the cancer was incredibly aggressive, a type of sarcoma. It had already spread, and it would be what killed her. Perhaps not this year, perhaps not the next, but at some point in the future. That was on a Friday. She was dead the next Wednesday. Unbeknownst to anyone, it had already spread to her heart. She was a wonderful woman, with a bright smile and a kind word for everyone. She was a devoted Christian. She was a loving wife to a husband who had adored her, and a mother to 3 children, twins in their senior year of high school, and a younger teen who had just started high school this year. She was the type of person that at her funeral, even a pastor stood up at a loss for words and just looked at the congregation and said, I can't tell you why. This makes no sense. There is no why. It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard come from a pulpit. As we were traveling back and forth to assist my uncle in all the tasks that come up as one lays someone to rest, especially unexpectedly, I inadvertently outed myself to my mother. She began the conversation, Kay, I don't know how he can do it. If it were me, I'd be unable to get off my knees. It's the power of God working through him. God is real. I cast around looking for an appropriate answer. There seemed three options. I could agree and let it go. I could not respond, or I could make a non-committal answer of some type. The first option, to agree and let it go, felt dishonest to me. It was one thing not to mention my lack of belief to my family. It felt something totally different to deliberately deceive my mother. The second option, to not respond, felt rude. Our Southern sensibilities are ingrained from birth, and just ignoring the comment seemed nasty. I went with the third option and responded, "I'm glad he's finding comfort." And lo, the shitstorm unleashed. Despite never having had a conversation on the subject, my mother, a source of unconditional love and respect in most every instance of my life, declared she knew what I believed. She said, "Your father and I did not raise you wrong. We raised you to believe." She insinuated that I was denying my children a proper upbringing, the type of upbringing that I'd had myself. I was met with the argument from family tradition. "I'm a good Christian. Your grandfather was a good Christian man. My grandmother was a good Christian woman. This is the string that ties our family together." Perhaps the best moment, the highlight of the conversation, was the sentence, "Don't get too involved in your own intellect." Yes, my mother told me not to get too smart for religion. Since that day, we've not broached the topic that clearly again. I basically bolted from the car the moment it stopped, and I honestly have not had the intestinal fortitude to bring it up again. I know this letter turned out to be quite long, but I have a moral I wanted to share. Even if you intend to keep your lack of belief to yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that in my opinion, imagine what would happen if you accidentally let it slip, or someone else did, and have a plan. Don't be taken by surprise, because it's an awful spot to find yourself in. And in reality, there's a relief that comes from being out. I no longer scramble to clear my coffee table of books about atheism when my parents are due over. I don't hesitate to question religion when it comes up, and I have firmer ground to insist that my children are not indoctrinated by that side of the family against my will. There's a burden that's lifted when it's no longer a secret, even if the circumstances are less than ideal. We may not use the A word. She tells people that I take philosophy too far, but it still made a change. I also see the change in them. They think a little more before they blithely say things about God or attribute things to him or offer to pray for me or the kids. I'm sure the conversation's coming again. It's only been 5 months since the last one, but I have reason to hope that it will go much differently. Thanks for the show and for all you do and for taking the time to read this diatribe. Kayla. Kayla, thank you so much for sharing the story. Much appreciated. To the phones, area code 256. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
Hey, Seth, this is Spencer. How's it going?
I'm well, Spencer. We're talking about being outed by someone else. Do you have an experience with this?
Yes, sir. Very recent experience. Actually, my wife is the one that emailed you. You read her email at the beginning of your I'm Offended episode. My wife and I were down visiting my family, and we got to talking to my Church of Christ preacher grandfather.
That's right. She spoke about your parents becoming aware of it and not on your own timing.
No, not at all. We were talking about misogyny in the Bible. I was actually talking about it with my dad at first, and he recognized that I had some legitimate points, and he didn't know how to answer except for the usual, context, knee-jerk reaction. He said, "You should ask your grandfather about that because he's a preacher." And so we did later that day at lunch, and we got to talking, and it got a little heated, and I guess I just went too far and asked too provoking of a question, and eventually prompted the question, do you even believe in God? And of course, I hesitated for a second, but I eventually just answered honestly and told him, "No, I don't." And of course, that was the initial shock was. It took a minute to get over, but I was then barraged by the typical apologetics of, "So what do you believe? Believe in evolution? Believe in Big Bang? It's just a theory," that kind of good stuff.
what's happening now? Are they trying to fix you?
A little bit. My dad, we've been talking on the phone every night, and he's actually come a long way since that happened. It was pretty traumatic, but he's come a long way. But my granddad, he actually set me up an appointment to talk with a Christian apologist, biologist here in my local area. That was fun. His name was Brad Harem. We met last Tuesday and talked about evolution and the Bible and sin and all that, and atheism and everything. My dad and my granddad came up, and we all visited this guy and talked to this Christian apologist. My granddad was sure that this guy would show me the light and show me how stupid atheism was. We talked with the guy for about 4 hours, and by the end of it, my dad was like, that guy was no lightweight. You really held your own against that guy. He although he disagrees with me, my dad is starting to open up and see where I'm coming from. My granddad just thinks I'm an idiot, but my dad is a little more open-minded.
And what happens when the wife's family finds out?
Well, my mom was upset in particular and actually threatened to tell my wife's family, which would have been really bad because I know her family would not take it well at all. Thankfully, we talked them out of that, saying that it's probably best that they don't know, because my dad even went so far as to say that if they knew I was an atheist, they wouldn't have let their daughter marry me.
Oh, man.
So that was pretty rough.
So did they blame you then? They blame you for the fact that she's no longer a believer?
They think that I led her stray, yes. They think that she's just going along with me, doing whatever I say. I'm an atheist, or you are too. Okay, honey.
Well, the reason I say that is because they come from the mindset of, you're the head of the house. You set the tone. She's following your leadership. This is how religious couples often speak in more fundamentalist churches. So you had a responsibility to keep your family in church and to follow Christ. And here you are essentially leading her astray. That kind of thing? Yeah, exactly. Because, as I said, what sparked the conversation was the whole misogyny bit. And I was saying, why does God make women subvert to men? Why aren't they just equal? And, they come to an agreement, they discuss it and they agree with each other, as opposed to, I'm the man and I get to tell you what to do just because I have a penis. Yeah. It doesn't matter if I'm right or not. And they kept saying that that's how it should be. Even my aunt, who obviously is a woman, was saying that the man should be in charge. And I just wanted to ask, do you not value yourself? Do you not value your own opinion? It was just so bizarre to hear even a woman back the scriptures so fervently. I'm sure you would like these particular chess pieces to have been moved a little bit differently, but honestly, I hope there is that measure of relief like Kayla was talking about. I mean, there must be a part of you that's like, There definitely is, because, of course, ripping that Band-Aid off initially was not fun. That freaking hurt. But heads have cooled down. My mom said some really harsh things, even saying that my wife and I shouldn't have children, which that really hurt. But she has come down. I even in the moment when it was happening, I was telling myself, she's upset. She doesn't mean it. She doesn't mean it. But she has come down. She's come a long way in a very short period of time, because this only happened a couple weeks ago. But I actually saw her not too long ago. We actually had a pleasant, it was brief, but it was a pleasant and normal interaction, as if nothing had ever happened. I think both my parents are content to just let bygones be bygones and just not talk about it, agree to disagree type of thing. Because I've tried to make it as clear as possible. I'm not trying to take, if religion gives you comfort, community, whatever, that's great. I'm not trying to take that away from you. I just want us to be a family. I've heard you talk about that before on your show, and that's what I tried to reiterate to them is I don't care about religion. I don't care about this, that we disagree. I love you. I want you to love me, and I just want us to be a family. Well, Spencer, thanks for sharing your perspective and your story, and I wish the very best to you and your squeeze, okay? Yes, sir. Thanks, Seth. I appreciate it. All right. Take care of yourself. Had an email in from Robert. He said, I'm 43 years old and have been an atheist since my mid-20s. I'm the child of divorce, having lived mostly with my mother and stepfather, while having visitation with my father and stepmother. Both sets of parents are religious. My mom and stepdad are Methodist, dad and stepmother are evangelical Assemblies of God. Needless to say, there was a lot of Bible study and prayers under both roofs as I grew up. My parents know I'm an atheist and have now for years. I came out to my mom after she wanted to give me a handmade nativity scene for Christmas and became questioning and a bit offended that I didn't want to accept it. She cried when I tried to explain my atheism, but to her credit, this was the last time we have discussed religion. No good son who loves his mother ever wants to see her cry, and certainly never wants to be the cause of those tears. I had a lot of regrets in coming out under those circumstances, but I'm glad our relationship has not been negatively impacted by my revelation over 10 years ago. My relationship with my father and stepmother is a different, more contentious story. My now ex-wife outed me to them. They live in Illinois. We lived in Las Vegas. We only saw them a handful of times during the 9 years we were married, so personal interactions were obviously limited. I had explained to my ex-wife that my dad and stepmom were very religious. I think they were still married. He's got X in parentheses, so I want to make sure that timeline-wise we're all tracking. And not to discuss our non-belief with them. However, one day during a phone conversation, my wife slipped and revealed that I was in fact an atheist. And from that moment forward, the relationship with my dad and stepmother was never the same. Nearly every time I would talk with them, particularly my dad on the phone, there was drive-by preaching, mentioning something to do with their beliefs, church, etc. Most phone conversations would end with my dad telling me he's praying for me, leaving me in an awkward silence since I didn't want to inflame the family holy war that was brewing. This went on for a few years until it all came to a head during my divorce. With my life in shambles at the time, my dad felt that was the perfect opportunity to hop on his divine soapbox and minister to me. He spoke uninterrupted for about 10 minutes about Christ's love and how he finds comfort in his beliefs. He told me that if ever there was a time to accept Jesus, it was now. And his love would bring me clarity, strength, and comfort during my most challenging time. I had plenty on my plate at the moment, and as he was speaking, I felt the needle on my tolerance meter edging into the red. I couldn't believe he was so boldly disrespecting my wishes not to discuss religion. As I told him several times over the years since my outing, I did not want to talk about it. And using this opportunity to proselytize, finally I erupted. I had enough. I harshly criticized his timing and admonished him for forcing his beliefs on me. I challenged him on a few key points, including his belief in the power of prayer. The conversation ended abruptly after that, and for the better part of a year, we barely spoke. I eventually offered an olive branch to my dad, with the condition we leave religion out of our conversations, as I felt it was best for the continued healing of our relationship. A few years removed from the big blow-up, religion's beginning to creep back into the conversations again. For example, I recently had some health concerns. Dad made sure to let me know he's praying for me. I fear that we'll have another confrontation someday. I guess it wouldn't have mattered if I had been outed to my dad and stepmom, or if I'd come out on my own terms. The end result would be the same, I believe. I'd be the apostate, the family's black sheep. I suspect they'd be tirelessly thinking of ways to introduce the topic of religion in nearly all conversations, in hopes I would bite and eventually come back to the flock. I've discovered they don't really understand what atheism is, nor are they really interested in hearing why I am an atheist or how I came to be. Instead, they feel I'm rebelling against them and against God, much like a petulant teenager. It saddens me that while I try to respect their right to believe in whatever they choose and not challenge them in the interest of a healthy relationship, it is not reciprocated. Lastly, I want to thank you for all you do. Your show is a great source of information and inspiration. I hope the Thinking Atheist program is around for many years to come. Best wishes for continued success. Thanks, Robert, very much for the email. Area code 423, you're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
Hi, Seth. My name is Michelle. Thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. We're talking about people who have been outed by somebody else. Do you have a story?
I was outed against my will, and it turned out to be a good thing. It turned out that a friend of mine ex-friend now, on Facebook just completely outed me, saying, you're an atheist, you blasphemy, and I had not said anything completely out of line. I just said a lot of things about separation of church and state, and went on and on about me being a non-believer. And then he unfriended me and then came back at me, with a lot of Bible verses and quotes and telling me I was going to hell and all that. So I had to block him. And another friend of mine saw all of that, and she started saying I was going to hell and I'm going to burn in hell and all of that kind of stuff. And actually, I was raised secular, so I don't have any of that mythos in my history, so that doesn't hold any fear. But yeah, it outed me to people that, professionally, I'm not out. I'm a doctor, a volunteer doctor, but I wasn't ready to do it, to tell people I don't believe in your whatever, that most people.
If I may ask, why haven't you come out professionally? Do you work in a highly religious culture? Or do you worry about the patients not trusting you, or am I reading too much into it?
I would say, sir, it's both. Actually, the clinic where I volunteer right now, oh, man, let me kind of coalesce all that into saying that the woman that founded the clinic, and I'm quite sure she's not listening to this, right? She considers it to be a faith-based clinic, but all of us who work there certainly do not practice faith-based medicine. I certainly don't, but she's got Bible verses and all that kind of insanity hanging from the walls, and yeah.
It's
crazy. It's really crazy.
If I need to sort of excise this info from the show, because I don't want to accidentally out you. You know what I'm saying?
I'm totally fine. I'm completely fine with it.
I'll slice it out. I totally don't want to be the guy who outs somebody else, because I've got an email coming up later in the show where something along those lines actually happened.
If you have to for time purposes, that's fine. But I'm really past it. I think
it's interesting. We've got a healer. We've got somebody who's a medical professional who is working in an environment where, you guys aren't blowing incense on people. You're practicing real medicine, but it's supposedly a faith-based thing.
Medication. Yeah, that is evidence-based. Sure.
How does that make you feel when there's so much science going on around you and yet people are thanking the power of prayer?
I had to set a lot of firm limits. When I first started volunteering there, the woman that founded the clinic, and it's a good thing, the clinic is, but she was not interested in my credentials. She asked where I went to church and what religion I was, and I was certainly not going to tell her I was an atheist. Culturally, I'm Jewish. So I just told her I was Jewish, and that was not satisfactory to her apparently. Right, because I didn't accept Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. Believe me, I've heard that one about 100 times, and I finally had to explain to her that we needed to keep religion out of our professional relationship. And she hasn't done that in a couple of months.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing your perspective and for being a part of the broadcast tonight. Much appreciated, Michelle.
Well, thank you, sir, and thank you for all you do. I appreciate it.
All right, take care of yourself.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye. So weird being called sir. I'm a great many things, my friends, but I'm not a sir, okay? I had an email in from Kale. It said, my own outing came in spurts with different members of my family, but the funniest moments when my then 4-year-old son looked at the Bible on my aunt's coffee table and asked me, Daddy, what's this book? Bible? We don't have this at our house. All I could do was just stand there with my hands in my pockets and tried to look my aunt in the eye and explain that one. had an unsigned message in that said this. It was about 6 months ago when my older Christian brother somehow noticed I had joined the Thinking Atheist Facebook page, along with the Atheist Experience, etc. I didn't know there was such a thing as an activity log on Facebook. And I also thought joining a group page was a private ordeal. I did not know that he saw this until I got a call from my boss, who just so happens to be my dad. He's a well-known Christian artist here in Louisiana, and his most popular painting at the moment just so happens to be your favorite story, Noah's Ark. And he's referencing my Noah's Ark, God, Giraffes, and Genocide video. He called to tell me that I was fired because he knew what I was up to and did not want an atheist communist working for him. Right away, I knew my brother or his wife must have told him. Before I knew it, my whole family knew, and nothing has been the same since. My story is very similar to yours, Seth. One of the largest churches in my hometown started in my dad's living room with just 12 people. My dad's known for his Bible verses at the bottom of his paintings, and he's currently writing a book on the Book of Revelation. My relationship with him has completely gone down the drain. He told me I was the Antichrist, and that I was on the side of his arch enemy, and told me he wanted nothing to do with me. My mom hasn't been as harsh, but she refuses to talk to me about any of it, but decided she would send me creation science DVDs instead. And somehow I love you at the end of a text or email suddenly changed to love ya. This has been a heartbreaking year for me. The most ironic thing about all this is that about a year ago, I decided I was going to read the Bible myself, and that's what caused my non-belief. That book is not what I thought it was going to be. Just like I heard you say on one of your podcasts, I'm not going back. No way. I'm much happier now, and I appreciate every second I have in this precious life, and it frustrates me to no end my family cannot wait for the real life to begin. The quote-unquote real life, which I believe is heaven. I hope one day my family will accept me for who I am, and I know you share the same hope. Thank you, Seth. You have no idea how much encouragement you've been for me in the process. Thank you. Thanks for sharing this kind of difficult part of your life for us. You know, it's funny. I used to do some work for a church in Louisiana. Was it in Baton Rouge? Big-ass church. And they put some big-ass crosses on the highway, like a 200-foot center cross. I mean, you can't miss them. And if I remember right, what was the name of that church? Was it Bethel something? They had two main campuses, and the pastor would finish a sermon at one church, and he'd get in a helicopter, and they'd fly him to the other campus, and he would do a sermon there. And then he would fly back and do another sermon. He just helicoptered back and forth across town several times every Sunday morning. So I think while the praise and worship and stuff was going on, he was actually in the chopper, airborne, getting ready to drop into whatever. That was back in the, that's probably 10 years ago. For some reason, that church just popped into my mind. Jake said I was declared an atheist by my family when I was a sophomore in high school. I myself didn't agree with this. But apparently a few questions is the equivalent of hating God. I first started having doubts when I was taught the basics of the theory of evolution in my freshman year biology class, which led me to begin researching my own faith, instead of obviously taking it only on faith. What I found was a litany of nonsense and cruelties unsupported by the evidence that I had an extremely difficult time agreeing with. In the end, I regretfully abandoned my former faith, simply unable to believe the lies or put on a mask any longer. I confided in my brother after a few months of silent mulling over my doubts, and I was immediately shut down and sent away in a heap of shame. I wasn't sent terribly far, as we were about to head somewhere with my mom, and as I sat alone in the car with my brother, I could almost feel something building up. But I assumed it was just my imagination. After all, I wouldn't be outed to my mother by my own brother, would I? A wave of shock enveloped me, pulling me under the water, when my brother suddenly exclaimed, "Jake's an atheist!" The look I received from my mother that day will haunt me for my entire life. It's almost as if the word disdain was written all over her face, and I slouched in my chair, suffering in the silence on the endless car ride. 4 years later, and not much has changed as far as their attitudes toward me. I officially rejected my faith in my senior year after listening to the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate. I seriously doubt the two were trying to create another atheist, but they did a swell job, especially Ken Ham. And I've since read several books, including Hitchens' God is Not Great and yours. I think my mom has finally come to understand my thoughts and lack of beliefs aren't simply me rebelling or going through a phase. And though we disagree on matters of faith, we're usually able to have conversations without the issue coming up. As to my thoughts on closeted atheists, I find the issue to be completely understandable and undeserving of ridicule by their out counterparts. I don't feel people who likely have much riding on their hidden non-belief should be outed. I think people, religious or not, should try to empathize with the individual and try to help them in any way they can. Though I find it hard to believe believers can actually help much on providing suitable answers to troubling questions. Jake, thank you so much for the message. Area code 402, you're on the Thinking Atheist Radio Podcast. Who's this?
Marche.
Hi, Marche. Thank you so much for calling. We're talking about being outed by someone else. What do you think?
Well, personally, I'm still a closeted atheist. But that story about the guy who was accidentally outed on his Facebook, that's actually a fear of mine, that somebody might go through my stuff and see all the atheist pages that I've been liking.
Some people make fake accounts, that come up with a different name, and they'll use that to be able to sort of scratch the rational itch, so to speak. That way family and friends are blissfully ignorant. I don't know if that's a good solution, but that's a solution that some people have tried.
Yeah, I've actually made a personal page, but then I had accidentally shared stuff from that page on my personal Facebook, and it really scared me.
So does that make you nervous? I mean, you worry about the cat getting out of the bag?
Yes, I do. And I'm only 15 years old, and I've been an atheist for like a couple months, and it's really hard.
Well, just remember this, okay? The vast majority of the atheists that I have run into, they're not out to kill God. They don't hate God. They don't fit the caricature that's being painted of the atheist, the non-believer, the skeptic. The thing you and I want to know is just whatever the evidence supports, whatever's true. And so if anybody comes after you, ultimately, just remind them that, you just want to do whatever's true, whatever that is. And if a God shows up tomorrow and we can measure him, her, it with some sort of a scientific measuring method, then we'll talk. But until then, we remain the skeptic on the issue of God, okay?
Exactly.
All right. Thanks for calling the show. You take care of yourself, okay?
You too. Thank you.
Good night. 419. You're on the Thinking Atheist Radio Podcast. Who's this?
This is Robert. I was outed on accident by myself, actually.
What happened?
I was probably 3 months in to sort of saying, I guess there's no God. I went out and bought The God Delusion. And I came home, and my sister, I live in Texarkana, Texas, and my sister was going to school up in Ohio. I didn't know it, but she came down to visit me. And I got excited when I got home, and I was like, oh, hey. I just threw the book on the table, and I was like, hey, let's go out and get something to drink or get something to eat. It's about 6 o'clock. I came home, and I was like, oh, crap, I forgot I left the book on the table. And my wife was there, and my mother had come down as well. And they'd been like, what's this? I was like, it's just a book, just reading. That's sort of how that happened.
Didn't take them long to connect those dots, huh?
Yeah. My wife she's not too bad about it. She's like, you think what you think, and I'll think what I think. It doesn't really come up, but my mother's, she's Southern Baptist raised and sort of converted to Catholicism not too long ago.
I mean, how conservative can you be?
Yeah. She's not too bad about it. Every now and then she'll make some sort of offhand comment. Like she got a job and she's moving to Atlanta, and I was helping her pack up her stuff, and she was giving away a couple things and all this, and she picked up this sign she had in the kitchen that says like God blesses his house, but he doesn't clean it or something like that. And she's like, I better throw this away because I know you're not going to use it or something. I was like, what is that for? Just pack it in your bags. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to make rude comments.
A lot of parents see the apostasy of a child as their failure, right? The world is watching us. Our religious friends are watching us, and look at our kids. So we look like we are horrible parents. They take your non-belief personally. Has that been the case?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah. The funny thing is, she travels for work. She was a tire salesman for the longest time. She went, I think, a corporate meeting in Dubai they had. And on the flight over, she was sitting next to a guy. They ended up talking a bunch, and they ended up, meeting later on and going on a couple of dates. And then she actually moved in with him, and I find out that he's an atheist as well. And so she came over to my house one day. She's like, "Oh, Christopher Hitchens, huh? God's Not Great. Yeah, Vince has that book." I was like, "Did you read it?" She's like, "No, I'm not touching that book." I was like, "Come on now, it's just a book. Just read it,
That might be kind of a thick one for her. She needs a gateway book probably before she jumps in.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking as well. I was going to send her Bill Nye's new book. I got that and read that. It was a great book.
How is that? I've been reading that he's definitely an activist lately, but I haven't seen or read the book.
I bought the book, and then I also got the audiobook. And I highly recommend the audiobook if you like Bill Nye, because he reads it, and, it's Bill Nye. So, I've listened to it probably 3 times. It's great stuff.
Good recommendation. We'll pass that on to the audience, man. Thanks so much for calling.
Yep, no problem.
All right, take it easy.
Yeah.
Lauren sent me a message and said, I've been an out atheist for a while, mostly online, though I've had several real-world visits at my door from Jehovah's Witnesses. From their first visit onward, I made no bones about telling them I was an atheist. Those conversations have been interesting and relatively cordial. However, I had an interesting online experience a few years ago. I'm a member of Atheist Nexus and participate in that community pretty regularly. During the 2012 election season, there was a post where a number of us, myself included, opined regarding the initial lack of the mention of God in the Democratic platform. Well, some days later, I was scanning CNN.com and saw an article, "Conventions Turn Atheists Off." Intrigued, I clicked on the link. And about 4 or 5 paragraphs down, there was an excerpt of my comment from the Atheist Nexus post, complete with my name and a link to the post. My reaction? An unbalanced admixture of being surprised and pissed off. Make no mistake, I was out long before this happened, and I don't blink when I identify as an atheist. However, what irritated me was that the author of the CNN article had plucked my input from the site without so much as a "by your leave" or "may we use this." Granted that anything on the internet's pretty much fair game for someone to swoop in and quote mine, this was perhaps more a matter of manners, or lack thereof. Also interesting to note, there's been one other incident of my Atheist Nexus work being cited since that time. Lauren, thanks for the message. Will said, I've been a big fan of the podcast since the spring of 2012. Imagine my surprise to find out you were going to visit Houston that fall. It was at the Fox and Hound, sponsored by Houston Atheist. By the way, that was a ball. We did a tour stop there. It's like a sports bar. And they have this whole section that they just sort of cordoned off just for us, and it was packed. So there we all, we've got all the chairs and the tables and pool tables and everything everywhere. We're all just hanging around, packed in that area. Back to the email, I'm sorry. He said, it was sponsored by Houston Atheist at the Fox and Hound. Why mention this caveat, you might ask? Well, I work at a large energy services company nearby, It may or may not be the place Dick Cheney was CEO before his tenure as Bush's VP. It's relatively common for some coworkers to go get drinks after work, but I figured since it was the middle of the week, at a busy time of year, I wouldn't have to worry about running into anyone. At any rate, for the most part, my coworkers are predominantly of the Protestant creationist mold, so it happened. But as I was walking up to the Fox and Hound, two of my more religious coworkers had left the building and were heading in my direction. They stopped in the middle of my path and started asking what I was up to. At that time, I didn't want to be outed for fear of professional repercussions. Before I could answer, one of them, from deep Louisiana, blurted out in a deep redneck accent, "Hey, are you an atheist?" I'm trying to do Louisiana, but I can't do it. "Hey, you an atheist?" Use your imagination. I paused for a second, breathed in, and answered, yes, I am. To which he replied, "Oh, okay then." And we said our goodbyes and went on our way. I'm still working at the same company for the time being, so if I learned anything from the experience, it would seem most people don't give a crap about your personal leanings if you don't wear it on your sleeve. I'm looking to perhaps the near future to start to engage family more than I have using the Socratic method. I'm still reserved about work, though, as I highly value professionalism, and I'm not sure how atheism would mix. At any rate, however, I think relatively few can claim they were outed by attempting to meet and fanboy out with Seth Andrews. I don't know how to feel about that, dude. Well, thanks for being there that night, and I really almost feel I feel good and glad and guilty at the same time. Yeah. By the way, after hearing your email, that has been your experience, a positive experience. I'm delighted, but it has not been the experience of many. In fact, the author of my next email may just disagree. Her name is Jenny. She says this: "My accidental outing doesn't involve my parents, both of whom regard my self-identification as an atheist with a mild state of denial. But it does involve my sister and aunt from my mother's side. A few years ago, my uncle died due to a heart problem that had required multiple open heart surgeries. It had been a painful time for my sister and I, particularly because we couldn't visit our favorite uncle during his final weeks or attend his funeral due to distance. We'd been very close to our uncle when we were young, and not being there with him at the end of his life was difficult for both of us. Once my uncle's affairs were settled, my aunt decided to travel around to visit old friends and some family members. My sister, who regarded my atheism with curiosity and my rants about what I was learning about science and religion with an open ear, lived with me in a small apartment. My aunt came to visit with two of her older friends in the late afternoon. Due to limited seating and space, my sister and I sat on the floor while our aunt and her friends took the small couch and chair in the living room. We had some fun, speaking of fond memories about my uncle. The topic of conversation turned to coping with my uncle's death and my aunt's renewed faith. I suppose that imagining my uncle in heaven was comforting for my aunt. The fact that he was no longer suffering was enough for me. My sister, after listening to my aunt speaking about heaven and her faith in my uncle's ascension to it, suddenly decided to say, "Jenny's an atheist, so she doesn't believe in heaven." I have to say, there's nothing quite as awkward as having a respected family member and two people you've just met stare down at you like you've just grown a second head. As I sat on the floor, I was given a lovely lecture, which included statements such as, "There are no atheists in foxholes," and questions like, "So you believe in nothing?" Even though she was under my roof, I didn't feel that right after my uncle's death was the correct time to attack my aunt's beliefs. Given the situation, I don't think countering any of her statements would have been seen as anything but an attack. Out of respect or cowardice, I decided to allow my aunt to speak her piece, and I said nothing. I didn't want to speak about religion with my aunt that night anyway. Conversation fell into an awkward silence, and my aunt and her friends left to go back to their hotel. My sister apologized profusely after they left. She, now identifying as an atheist, has an easier time telling people she's a lesbian than she does speaking about her lack of religion. Unless she's speaking to someone coming door to door to invite us to church. I've only spoken to my aunt once since her visit, and that was only for her to ask for the phone number of another family member. I must say, after being made to feel like a child under the roof I work hard to keep over my head, it's made me unlikely to start up any conversations. Thank you for the podcast, the videos, and everything you do. When I began listening to your podcast, they cooled my outright animosity toward religion. I fear that if I spoke with the disdain I previously held for religion that evening, the damage to my relationship with my aunt would be irreparable. I can build a bridge over awkward silence when I am ready to cross it. Thanks again, Jenny. Jenny, thanks for the message. Doug sent a message and said, from the other side of the fence, I once told a friend over Skype in response to something he said, just how critically thinking atheists like us roll when he wasn't wearing headphones and his mother could be heard to gasp. We laugh about it today. But then he'd thought he'd lost his mother to a heart attack, and I'd thought I'd lost a friend. Call it a cautionary tale in the virtual age. I had a similar story today. I had a message from a buddy who was listening to something from my page, and he had his headset on, but he didn't realize that it was also coming out of his computer speakers, and the security guard at his office heard atheist content. And so John sent me a message, and he said, the security guard's been trying to convert me to Jesus all afternoon. Good luck with that. Patrick said this. A few days before our wedding, my fiance and I took her sister, mother, and grandmother out to a pancake breakfast. To clarify belief systems early, my mother-in-law is a New Age herbal medicine nut. My sister-in-law is apathetic. Grammy, she is as Mormon as Brigham Young. As we're in the parking lot after breakfast, Grammy's talking about how God had brought my fiancé and I together. God was behind it. God, not us, God. I was annoyed slightly, but Grammy's a kind, wonderful woman. I wasn't going to say anything because I'm about to be married and I don't need drama. But my soon-to-be wife can't help herself and says, Patrick doesn't feel that way. He's an atheist. He thinks we were brought together by chance and we're in the right place and time to love each other. And everyone starts staring at me like I'm a masturbating monkey at the zoo. They want to look away, but are somewhat fascinated. Really? My mother-in-law asks. Yeah. Why? Don't you think there's something great and amazing in the universe? I do. Us, I think us. We're amazing. So I think that, I mumbled. What about when you die? Well, I have never died yet, so I don't know. Maybe there's something. I haven't seen it myself, not really. I think I'll just die. The people you love are just gone? Yeah. Except for my memories, and the memories of others. Yeah, they're gone. It went on like this for a few minutes, morals and such, until Grammy said, that's okay, darling, I love you. I'll pray a little more so God will know he should keep you. Mom, said my mother-in-law, Patrick doesn't think that'll matter. But it'll make me feel better, and with that she hugged me and got in the car. It turns out Grammy didn't know what an atheist was. She was mildly shocked a few hours later when I was outed a second time. But my wife's family loves me despite my heathen tendencies. Grammy loves me despite me putting a copy of the Book of Mormon next to the God Delusion. I think he means to say putting the God Delusion next to the Book of Mormon, but I get it. And I love them because they're kind, genuine people. Patrick, thank you very much for sending the message. One more email, and then I'd like to sort of leave you with something that I'd written last year that I think will encourage anybody who's going through that sort of rattled state of apostasy. or at least being outed by someone else and being made to feel inferior in many ways. So hang in there, okay? Brian said this: when I was in high school, in a bedroom community in southeastern Michigan, I was in band. While we like the state and national symphonic band competitions, we, of course, had the usual obligations to the school as well: marching band, performing for fundraisers and school events, etc. I was in 10th grade in 1990, and we were playing for the baccalaureate for the 12th grade graduating class. While fact-checking the spelling, I note that Wikipedia suggests this is a Catholic school service. But in our public high school, this was a yearly secular event with no religious overtones, except this year. The valedictorian of the senior class got up for his speech. He was not a popular person because, in addition to the typical and unfortunate nerd baggage of someone who gets good grades, he was also somewhat quiet. But when engaged in conversation, he was very pushy about his opinions and generally came off as being arrogant. We were expecting the usual empty platitudes, which are par for the course whenever student speakers address the school at events. Instead, he started into his speech and quickly moved to his main point. If you believe in God and Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, please stand up and be counted. Go ahead, stand up. Now, while I didn't advertise my creep from liberal Christianity to deism to atheism to people who didn't care, I was honest if anyone actually asked. So it was no secret I didn't believe in the Jesus. I felt no peer pressure for my own part from this incident, though it made my flesh crawl and was profoundly inappropriate to put people, classmates, teachers, and guests of graduates on the spot like this in what was effectively a public Jesus litmus test. Many of my best friends were in band. I looked around at the ones I knew didn't believe in God. Some stayed put, annoyed or a bit put off, a little worried or even embarrassed to be put in this position. Some, however, stood up because the peer pressure got to them. Or they didn't want to out themselves in front of their families or classmates they weren't comfortable talking about this with. My thoughts were racing through my head. What did I think of this situation? Was this even legal? It certainly wasn't acceptable. Should I walk out and get punished for leaving a band event? The one thing that didn't occur to me was to stand up. But having come to that conclusion, the very next thought was that I wasn't going to blame anyone who did stand up, who didn't actually believe in the Jesus. Screw that presumptuous religious bigot for trying to shame anyone who didn't believe as he did. It certainly provoked a lot of conversation afterwards and even a bit of harassment in school for people who didn't stand up. But fortunately, this was not the rule, and it was quickly dealt with. Talking with friends afterwards, some of them who stood up apologized for what they felt like was a betrayal of their friends like me, who decided to remain seated and deal with the consequences. I assured them it wasn't necessary, and while someone was in the wrong, it wasn't them. I certainly didn't feel abandoned by those friends or let down. I was very angry at the speaker for putting people I cared about in that situation. Some of my friends who did remain seated weren't out to their family, many of whom had guests in the audience, and some of these people had to deal with their outing on terms they wouldn't have chosen otherwise. Nobody has the right to force you to volunteer personal information you're not comfortable announcing in public. So if standing up and faking faith in a bad situation like this seems like a better idea than putting a giant A on your forehead and dealing with the consequences, more power to you. You shouldn't have been put in that situation in the first place. Brian, thank you very much for the message. I had on my heart last year, was it maybe late the year before in 2013, the shaming that does happen to people who are surrounded by the religious, often the superior religious, and they talk down their nose and look at them like they are damaged goods. And this is true on a number of different fronts. And so I wrote a letter. It's untitled. I put it on the Thinking Atheist blog in case you'd like a print version. It's also at the end of a speech that I had given called The Ultimate Question on YouTube. But I want to read it to you again here because I think it's a good reminder to people in that situation and those who know people in that situation that it's all right. And the letter goes like this. You learn a lot about people when you declare you're not going to live your life by their rules. And many in this audience know well the consequences of doing something so shocking as to be an individual, a singular voice, an often inquisitive voice, with its own tenor, its own style, its own song, its own message. You and I live in a world where conformity is comfort, and we all know how comfortable people can become. So many voices out there are merely an echo, a hand-me-down from a previous generation, and the generation before, and the generation before. Breaking that cycle is unthinkable. And why would they ever consider it, as the cloak they inherited feels so warm and safe? Everyone around them looks like them, walks like them, talks like them, everyone except for you. They nod in agreement. You raise an eyebrow of doubt. They just know the answer. You just know the answer raises many more questions. They take security in staying on the path. You feel compelled to break out and carve a path of your own. But this is not what was expected of you. They laid out the guidelines for a proper person to live, and they would make sure you turned out right no matter what. So what happened to you? At this moment, mothers and fathers carry embarrassment and shame that they failed as a parent because you left the straight and narrow, because you were co-opted and corrupted, because you rewrote the playbook in a language they consider to be foreign, confusing, ugly. You had two choices. You could keep the peace and line up with the others, or you could walk at your own pace in your own direction for your own reasons and accept the consequences and rewards that come with being your own person. And the fallout for many of you has been significant. These days, when they look at you, they only see what they think you should have been, what you could have been if only you had done it their way. They speak the words of love, but just barely. And by lacing the word love with distance and disdain, they cheapen it. In fact, every time they look at you and they say, I love you, you get that bitter taste, like you've just been schmoozed by a politician whose only real concern is getting you to change your vote. Yeah, they love you, but the full package, the 100% love, the unfiltered love, that's kept on reserve until you straighten up, until you fit in, until you conform, until you stop making waves, not until you start acting normal. For just a minute, let's take a look at normal, shall we? Normal is a husband and wife married per the Bible, in a church and under God, condemning non-heterosexuals for ignoring and even desecrating the lawful and ordained marital union that they now enjoy after 2 divorces. Normal is a mother telling a daughter that sex is dirty, that her body is dirty, that sexual desire is harmful, it's lust, and that she's cursed by the fall of Eve in the garden, a byproduct of sin designed to gain her worth from a future husband who, according to the book of Genesis and the design of God, will rule over her. Normal is a teacher frightening a 6-year-old kid with torture in hell. Normal's refusing to purchase a new car without first test driving 15 vehicles from 6 different car lots, checking the vehicle history, payments, insurance, safety record, resale value, and consumer ratings, but accepting the Bible as fact without even knowing who wrote the book of Genesis. Normal is a church communion ritual where men, women, and children symbolically eat flesh and drink blood. Normal is thanking God for food grown and prepared by human hands. It's giving God the glory for providing the new house that came with a 30-year mortgage. It's praying for safety after buckling your seatbelt, locking your doors, and loading your handgun. Normal is praying for healing after you call 911. It's Sunday school songs, a Bible on the nightstand, a check in the offering plate, an evangelist on the television, a Jesus fish on your car, and a t-shirt that says 7 days without Jesus makes 1 week. It's a prison disguised to look like a mansion, and you're not going to live like that. You've read the books and seen the history and learned the science and realized the world is much, much grander than most people ever imagine. You finally found your own voice. Damn it, you're going to speak in it. You've had the epiphany that you don't owe it to the rest of the world to keep them happy. You owe it to you to create happiness for yourself. And even though, wherever and whenever you can, you do say the words and take the actions that build bridges and soften the sharp edges and demonstrate a love for people and a desire for a better world, you are not a sheep to be led, an echo to be repeated, a cautionary tale, a bad example, a freak, a pervert, shameful, broken, ugly. You are not ugly. You are beautiful. You have figured out what so many billions of others have missed. Billions have missed it. That this life is too precious to spend in someone else's shadow. That when others judge everyone and everything that is different, they only indict their own shallow hearts and they cheat themselves out of amazing depth, breadth, color, culture, and humanity out there that is so much more wonderful than the tiny rooms people lock themselves into and the narrow tunnels they walk. That believing in things without evidence is not a virtue. Faith is not a virtue. It is something to be pitied. That sexuality isn't shameful, but something to be celebrated. That the condemnation of what is wrong, even when it's called sacred, is the obligation of any moral creature. That your hopes, dreams, desires, loves, pursuits, and passions belong to you and you alone. That you've stepped out of the crowd to stand forward, to stand out, to stand your ground. To know that even though you occupy a tiny speck upon a tiny speck inside this vast universe, and even though you don't believe your Father is a divine king and your mission is written in a magic book and you have an eternal mansion in the heavens, your life is wonderful and amazing and precious and so much more satisfying. Now, is that kind of life easy? Not necessarily, no. Is it popular? Maybe not. But be encouraged, because inside this 13.7 billion-year-old universe, there has never, ever been anyone exactly like you, and there never will be again. And you are simply living a life that honestly reflects that fact. And while others laugh at you because you are different, you can laugh at them because they are all the same. And that's my encouragement to you tonight. And if you'd like, I'll link the blog version, the print version of that in the description box of this broadcast. I know some people have liked to go back and revisit it. Some have taken those words and modified them for their own circumstance or the circumstances of a friend, and you're welcome to. I don't have any proprietary thing over this. It's just a letter of encouragement, and if you can use it in some way, in some form, please do so. Thank you so much for being a part of the broadcast. Next Tuesday night, we're going to debunk some bunk. How much fun is that going to be? And now that the broadcast is over, don't forget to go to naturebox.com and sign up to get your free sampler box of great tasting, wholesome snacks like dark cocoa, sun crunch, and so much more. Log on naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. And I'll see you next week. Take care.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.